Well, would you like to play a game? Quite often on the channel, I'll have a game called Where We're At, and I'll show different artifacts from some place in the world, and you're supposed to guess when and or where we are at. Today's game is a little different. It's a matching game, which should be fairly easy. And what we're going to do here is we're going to have a matching game and try to figure out if we can tell the difference at a simple glance between Sub Saharan Nubians, as they're known, and the ancient Egyptians. And to give us our questions here, we have our guest host, Egyptian History Defenders of Facebook, to read you the questions after a quick explanation of what we're looking at.
This is how ancient Egyptians depicted themselves, and this is how they depicted their enemies. Now let's play a little game. I'll show you two pictures and you guess which one is Egyptian.
Everybody ready? Here we go. Here are our choices. Lock in your votes.
Correct.
Great choice.
Now imagine if ancient Egyptians wanted to depict this woman. Would they depict her like this or like this?
I know this might seem tough for some. Lock in your votes.
Good job.
Yes.
You see.
Now you see, she said, if African Americans, how would they depict them? Well, they would of course depict them like the primitive Nubians that are known, and not the ancient Caucasian Egyptians.
See how easy it is to tell the difference between Egyptians and sub-Saharan Africans. And yet African Americans are claiming that ancient Egyptians were black, and they keep making blackwash photos like this, when in fact, the only people who did look like African Americans in ancient Egypt were their sub-Saharan enemies. And
What you know. Here's Kevin Hart, who recently came out and claimed that he was the ancient Egyptians. Here he is standing in front of two people that are supposed to represent Michael Jackson and Queen Nefertiti from back in the day whenever Michael had a song out called Remember the Time. And I think that really helped to kick in this endeavor with blacks.
African Americans existed in ancient times, Egyptians would have depicted them like this, not like this.
It's what you know. Many people say things like, well, they weren't black, but they weren't white. And that's kind of a crazy statement whenever all we have there in that area, especially at the time, are Caucasians. And they're enemies to the South. It might seem weird whenever you find out that scientists checking their DNA in a group from the Middle Kingdom on through and then looking at all the other ones they had DNA of, that there was a continuity to these people. And what they were really trying to do, looking at that necropolis there, was to see if there were any differences once people started infiltrating Egypt, i.e. once the Libyans took over, did things change? Once the Greeks started hanging around, did things change? Once the Persians came through, and then the Greeks with Alexander the Great and the Macedonians, did things change? In fact, into a modern Roman time, did things change? And they found that, well, it only changed at the end. And that ancient Egyptians were more closely related to Europeans than modern Egyptians. And this is the scientists' claim directly off DNA, which can't be refuted. However, Egyptologists said he's particularly suspicious of any statement that may have been unintended consequences of asserting this, yet again, from Northern Europe or North American perspective, Caucasians from there and held that, that there's a discontinuity between ancient and modern populations. This indicates that the ancient Egyptians were related to the same people that are today Europeans. And it seems to be concentrated more in far west Europeans, such as the Irish and so on. And that might seem strange to you too, till you find out there's an ancient story where Akhenaten's daughter had taken her retinue and a lot of people with her, wanting to stay in their monotheism idea, and went out the Pillars of Hercules and ended up landing in Scotland and Ireland. And she was known as Scotia, which means little flowers, and it is apparently where Scotland got its original name from. Her name was supposed to have been Mariatin in Egypt, and it is said that she was the first Mary, Queen of Scots. They still have a grave to this day, and even the Scottish, whenever they heralded their independence and relating to the Pope at the time, related that they had a heralded lineage from the ancient Scythians and from Egypt. They also mention in some of these papers that also the same genetics are found in ancient Anatolia. But on my side, I've shown where the Galilee idea has to come from the Gauls that weren't way over here in Spain and France and so on, like people are led to believe, but they were definitely there at the time. And even became mercenaries for Egypt. So it's strange to hear people claim, well, they weren't white, but they weren't black, or all these things. Well, right now, the demographic there doesn't match the ancient demographic. And strangely, with these African American claims, what they said was the main contributor to the differences were a couple of things. One, that due to Arabic influence and that slight difference that came in with them, along with the slave trade and things that came from that, gives about a 16% difference or so on their variables. But then also, after that point, before modern time, Sub-Saharan Africans were taken into slavery, and they were blended with a lot of these Arabic people and so on, and the locals there, and it leaves them with about a 1% match to the ancient Egyptians, usually found in the Coptic, which are the first Christians of the Egyptians to adopt it. So isn't it strange to find out something like this? To some people it may be, but it's an easy matching game and something that you can easily cognate. Another issue is they try to claim that these people are red ochre colored, and so that must mean that they were darker than white people they see today. Well, it's hard to believe that a farmer that would just be wearing his shorts or a kilt wouldn't get tanned enough to get real dark. But this same aspect idea of red ochre males and the pale females, as we just saw, is found all across the Mediterranean and Near and Middle East from people. From the Mitanni, the Minoans, the Phoenicians, ancient Sumer and Persia, and even Greeks, and no one is confused about any of these people and who they anciently used to be. Next week, we'll go into a matching where we'll see if we can tell the difference on a map of where things are, such as, can we match up Sub-Saharan Bantus with far west Sub-Saharan Africa? And could we match up somebody that was like the Dinka tribe of East Africa, or perhaps the current population there in Ethiopians and so on? And if we can tell the difference, because genetics says they aren't related, Some people just look at anybody that has skin darker than paper and tries to put them in one category. This is not true. In fact, the koisan, the pygmys, the Far Eastern Africans and West Africans are related to each other. And then, of course, we have endemic North African Caucasians that named it actually Africa after and by for themselves. But then before that, it was all called Libya. And if you look at Herodotus' map, it'll actually show you that they didn't really even know what Sub Sahara existed. And whenever they sent a trip of Necho, of the Phoenicians, to go all the way around the Cape, that they said that they went past the equator to the point that the sun was on the other side of the ship and things like that. And they're like, oh, come on. And they didn't know about it, but he had made a circumference trip around that. Later, there are also stories of the Phoenicians and going out the Pillars of Hercules and taking a left and actually trying to trade with people and what they went through, but that's for other videos. So how'd you do on our game today? Did you get 2 for 2? Would you like to see more of this game? Let me know down in the comments below. Peace.